the query string parameters. All right, and once we're familiar with route parameters, let's talk about the query string parameters, or they're also called URL parameters. And essentially, that is a way for us to send small amounts of information to the server using the URL. Now, this information is usually used as parameters to, for example, query a database or filter results. And that's really up to the people who are setting up the server. They decide what parameters are going to be accepted and what functionality will depend on those values. And to give you a real world example, let me go to my search engine and I'm just looking for Hacker News Algolia API. So when you're working on a front end apps, I'm not sure whether you worked with this API, but that is a very cool API. And essentially it's going to work as a good example of how we should be setting up the server. And this is as a side note, but notice the URL here. So they go with a domain, which in our case is, of course, localhost 5000, but here it is actually a Algolia domain. So algolia.com/API. Like I said, that is a pretty common practice. Then a version number, and then whatever list you're getting. So in here, it is items. Now check out this one. Doesn't that ring a bell? Of course, that is our route parameter, where they say, yeah, here's the list of items. But if you want to be more specific, please provide the ID. And then if you keep on scrolling, you'll notice the same thing with the users. Again, we have the main domain, API, version 1, users, that's the list. And then if you want to get a specific one, then of course, again, there is a route parameter. Now, this is just to showcase that I'm not randomly coming up with those things. No, that's how actually the servers work in real world. And let's keep on scrolling. And now we come to this interesting part where we can sort. So we're getting the data from the Algolia API. But then in my app, I can sort. I can say, hey, you know what? Get me specific Hacker News story, or get me stories based on some kind of search term. And hopefully you get the gist, where instead of just grabbing the whole thing, I can say, you know what? Get me all the stories that match foo. So again, we go with the URL, and this is really up to you how you set this up. In their case, they use search. And then here we have this question mark. And whatever is after this question mark is not technically part of this URL, meaning it's just a way for us to send that data to the server, and then server decides what to do with this data. So the URL is still this one, the one that ends with search. And then we have a question mark. And basically, this is just a specific info about the data that I'm requesting. So here the user adds a query parameter, and then the value is full. And then also has the tags of story. And that means that we're going to get all the stories matching full. Now, what else you could set up here in a query string? Pretty much anything. A pretty typical is going to be page. For example, if you have a list of things and I don't want to get 100 items at a time, I can say, you know what, split it up in pages and get me initially page number 1. And then only if the user clicks on a button that fetches the page number 2, then I get the second page. Then, for example, in here, they have hits per page. So that is going to be how many items per page. So again, after that question mark, if the setup is supported by the server, then of course you can add those key value pairs. And the way we add them, as you can see, is by using key value pairs. So we have question mark, and then we have a key, which in this case is query, and then the value. Now, before we continue, let me make something very, very clear. It's not like you can randomly search the web and just start adding these query string parameters and then expect that as a miracle, you'll just get the data that you're looking for. As far as the keys, they're designed on a server. So if I'll set up a key of chocolate milkshake, Algolia API is going to be like, I don't know what you're talking about. And the same goes for the value. So where I'm going with this, now we are in charge of that server. So it's up to us to handle those query string parameters. And I'm going to go back to our project and I'll purposely set up a new route. Please keep in mind one thing where a pretty typical setup is adding this to the list. So again, we'll look for specific property on our request object. And then if that property is provided, then of course we return a more detailed response, meaning there's maybe some filtering or something like that. But if not, then we'll send back all the products. Now I'll purposely set up a new route just so we don't jam all our code in this one route. But then in the next video, probably I'll show you how we can combine both routes. So let's keep on scrolling. So this is going to be our more complex params example. And let's go with app.get. And again, the route is really up to you. I'm going to go with API. Now, in order to make it interesting, I'm going to add that version 1, just like the API of Algolia has it. And then I'll say query. Now, I don't need to add question marks, nothing like that. I just set up query. That is my route. And then I have my callback function, rec and res. Now, in this callback function, in order to access those query string parameters, I need to go with rec and query. So let's go with console log, and we're going to look for request and not params. Sorry. We're going to go with query over here. And again, let's go with simple hello world, just so we can speed this up. And then if I go to the local host, and more specifically, I'm going to look for localhost, then 5000, then API, then version number 1, and then query. And then if I add this question mark, I can add as many query string parameters as I would like. So here I'm going to go with a name that will be equal to John. Then in order to combine them, we just add this ampersand. So we're going to go with name John and then ID 4. Just keep in mind that you can add as many query string parameters as you would want. And then once I navigate there, at the moment, I'm just going to get the hello world. So that's my default response from this URL. But in a terminal, notice I have name John and ID number 4. Again, this is a string, and this is going to be important in a second. But what this allows us to do is access those parameters and then based on them, do some kind of functionality. Now, first of all, I would want to change this around a little bit where I'm not going to be looking for name or ID. I'm going to be looking for search query parameter as well as the limit. So if the user wants to search for a specific product, he or she needs to provide that search query parameter as well as limiting, where the user can limit of how many products they are getting back. So let me navigate back and just to showcase that. So again, instead of name, I will zoom in. We'll say search is equal and then whatever I would want. So in this case, I'm just going to go with A. So effectively, this will return all the products that start with A. And then the second one is the what? That was the limit, right? So I'm going to say limit. And for now, let's just go with 2 of them. So this will return 2 products. I'll zoom out. And again, I have search and I have limit of 2. So now, of course, let's set up that functionality. And we'll simply start by creating new instance of those products. I'm going to go with let, and you'll see in a second why. So say sorted product. And in here, we'll use the spread operator. So we imported the product, and now I'm just going to copy the values. So this is going to be my new array. And the reason why I'm using let, because we will modify this value a bit. Now, instead of just console logging the query, I'll comment this out, and we'll set it up as const. And then again, I'm looking for 2 specific keys. I'm looking for the search and I'm looking for the limit. So if the user doesn't provide them, well, then we'll send back all the products. So we're going to go with query like so. So I can see the search and limit. Beautiful. And now instead of just sending back hello world, I'm going to check if the search is in my query string parameters, then I would want to filter my product. So I'm going to say if and then search like so. And we're going to go with sorted product. Since I'm using let, I can do that. I'm going to go with sorted product and then filter method again, straight up JavaScript. Again, I'll call this a product like so. And what I would want to return are the products that start with the value of my search term. So here I can say return product and name. So if the product name starts with, now again, this is straight up JavaScript, and I'll pass in the search. If that is the case, that is going to be my value in the sorted product. And I can right away check for the limit as well, where I'm going to say if and then limit, and if it exists. So if the user has provided it, again, let's go with sorted products and filter more. And in this case, I'm going to use the slice method where I'm just going to get specific items from the array. So I'm going to start with 0. And then remember, we're getting a string. So we need to go with number. And then again, we'll pass in the limit. Let's go here below both of them. And let's just say res dot and then status. And we're going to go with 200 like so. And then a JSON response. Now, when it comes to JSON response, we're just going to go with our sorted products, right? So we go back and let me just showcase something where if none of the query string parameters are provided, I'm going to send back my whole data. Why? Well, because I copied my products, right? Both of them were false. Both of them were undefined. And as a side note, there is an error here. Cannot send headers. And I'll talk about it actually in a second. That is one of my next topics. So let me just deal with this hello world by deleting it. And we're going to be in good shape. But I'll cover why we got this error and what gotchas you should be aware of. So let me go back again. Let's see. Again, we're getting all the products because the user did not provide that specific query string parameter. So if we right now navigate to the URL, and I'm going to start with a limit. And if in a limit, I'm going to say that I'm only interested in 2 products, check it out. Now, of course, my limit is 2. So I only have 2 products. Then if it's 3, then it's going to be 3. And then 4, and hopefully you get the gist. Where whatever value I provide here in a limit, well, I have the functionality for it. Now, keep in mind, again, name needs to match. If this is going to be limit instead of limit, again, I'm just going to get back all the products regardless of what is my value. And the same goes for the value of the query string parameter. If this is limit, but for example, I decide to pass in ABC, nothing. I get empty array. Why? Because my value wasn't what my functionality was looking for. And similarly, of course, we can add the search option as well. And I'm purposely showing them one by one so you don't get confused. So let's say search. And again, the functionality is set up where you need to provide a starting character. So in my case, I'm looking only for the products that start with A. And there it is. I have 2 of them. Now, if I want to limit, I can just add and here. And let's just type limit. And I'm only going to be looking for 1 product. And if I add this limit 1, there it is. Now I only get 1 product. Now, there's also obviously going to be the case where we return empty array. Why? Well, because I could go with search and look for the products of B. And unfortunately, when it comes to my products data, I don't have products that start with B. So we can handle that. Instead of sending back empty array, I could check what is the length of my array. And if, for example, it is less than 1, then I explicitly send back the response where I say, yes, the request was successful, but I couldn't return any product. So we can go with if and then sorted products. If the length of this array is less than 1, if it is less than 1, then of course I can just go with res dot status. Now, this is one gotcha where you're not sending back the 404. You're not saying the URL doesn't exist or the resource doesn't exist. In this case, you're trying to filter the product, but nothing came back. So whatever query string parameters were provided, they didn't yield any results. So you're simply saying status, and then you can go with send and we can go with no products matched your search, like so. So we can go here, and then if you refresh again with the same ones, we have no products match your search. So that is one option. You can send back the string, but a more common one is this one, where I'm going to comment this out for your reference again. And instead you go with return, and you're going to go with res dot status. And again, we have this error in the server. And again, I'll talk about it in the next video why we have that one. So we're going to go with res dot status, and we pass in the 200, and instead we send back the JSON one. And in that JSON, again, you can pass the string if you want, but a more common approach is setting up the object where you explicitly say that the request was successful or a failure. So you go with success, and that is equal to true. And then again, you come up with whatever name you would want. A generic one is data, and then you send back the array. Again, you are in charge here. You can really do whatever you would want. I'm just showing you a pretty common approaches to this situation. So again, I'm looking for some kind of product using my query string parameter. Now, unfortunately, server cannot return any data, meaning any product. And then, of course, I just get this success true because the request was successful. There was nothing wrong with my URL. However, I'm just yielding a empty data. So that's it. I can just delete it. And if I don't provide anything, then I'm going to get all the products. Hopefully that is clear how the query string parameters work. And now we can cover a few gotchas. All right. And two things that I would like to emphasize are following. First, remember those errors that we were getting in a server when we're setting up if conditions in JavaScript. If we don't explicitly return, then of course JavaScript just keeps reading the code, correct? So if I'm going to omit that return, I'm actually going to get this server error where I send back one response, and then JavaScript just keeps reading the code, and then Express is confused. Express is like, hey, wait a minute, I already sent back the response. So why you're sending another? Now keep in mind that it is happening in the same request. So you cannot send basically two responses in the same request, one after the another. Yeah, of course, you can send one based on the condition. So for example, if there are no products, you send back one response. And if you can yield some products, then great. Then you send the second one, but you cannot send both of them one after another in the same request. And if you want to see that error again in action, go to the query. You'll add a question mark here, and we're going to go with search. And again, it is equal to B, for example. That is my value. That's the starting value that I'm looking for. And once I do that, notice, yeah, I'm getting back the success true and data. But again, I have this big fat error in my server. And it says cannot set headers after they are sent to the client. So we can have only one response per request. And in order to avoid that, we just go with return. So always, when you're setting up the condition, make sure that you go with return. So that way we are returning from our callback function, the one we set up over here. And that way you'll avoid those errors. Now, of course, in this case, there's no more code to read. So yeah, it is a better practice if you just put this return here, but you won't get the errors since, again, there's nothing after that. And one more thing that I would like to mention, normally you're not going to set up a separate one just for the query. Yeah, there might be some cases, maybe there's some APIs who do that, but normally, again, you can just add it to where you're getting a list. So basically, if there's a query, beautiful, you're maybe going to sort that data, you're going to filter it, you're going to, I don't know, set up some pages or whatever. And if no query string parameters are there, then you send back the whole product. And if you take a look, pretty much nothing stops me here from just changing this to API and products, and the functionality is going to work. Where if there are some query string parameters present, beautiful. Notice how we're filtering our product. If not, then I always send back the products anyway. And as you can see, those are just copies of the products that are coming from my data.js. Hopefully that is clear.